Last Sunday, I know that I was being nourished by an appreciation for being with you during our service and afterwards on Sunday. I knew that I was nourished enough. You know how I knew? Because I didn't swerve into the strip mall on my northbound route to 202. I didn't need to swing into Starbucks to get an extra boost of caffeine from a tall cup of dark roast coffee with a splash of almond milk, which is sweet enough without sugar. I didn't feel the need of the warmth of the cup in my hands. I don't mean to say that the thought didn't occur to me, but I pushed it aside like a windshield wiper on slow speed, so that I could see clearly there was no real need for anything more. You could say that I was still sipping the experience of our service from last Sunday and sensing my own message about slowing down and lingering, about abiding with one another, about being with the multiple crises situations of this moment in history long enough to skillfully hone our own actions and responses, to linger rather than withdraw, rather than shrink from, to do something prematurely or haphazardly. So perhaps my own message in the sermon was delivered to me in a time-released formula. But I'm not telling you the whole story. You see, I was also appreciating the Soul Conversations group, where a group of us huddled in the Warner Room following the service last Sunday. Our monthly theme of the gift of transformation, and it became a great opportunity for group reflection also on the risks of change. I was still captured by the image of one of our newer attenders who told about how that in risking leaving their familiar religion and what was known, it was as if they had flown off a cliff and they were constructing the wings that would hold them while they were still in flight. I stayed with that image all week. I wondered aloud, what is it that allows someone to construct those kind of wings to hold one up, even in the midst of the risk of uncertainty, even in the midst of flight? This person was among the few of us in the conversation who appreciated this verse by Anais Nin that is actually also included in our UU hymnal. And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk that it took to blossom. And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. Whatever wisdom that is already in these words was refined in the stories that we shared with one another in that conversation. Yes, who needed a tall cup of dark roast coffee with a splash of almond milk when you're being nurtured in that particular way by the stories and the experiences of others? And when I was still sipping from my experience of the morning and the stories and the life lessons that we have shared with one another during those 40 minutes or so, I don't think I'm unusual. I was feeling the impact of real life stories that people can tell and the wisdom that they can share. If I am unusual, then I have been unusual for a long time. Don't answer that question. I can recall as a child how much I cherished the real life stories that my mother and my father and older adults would tell me, and how in the telling I would be able to sense some thread of enduring wisdom, receive some gift that nourished me, that still nourishes me to this day, and when I pause long enough to take it in. Now, since I was feeling somewhat stimulated by these conversations in the morning, I didn't dive right into my afternoon minister's nap when I got home. Well, I did get into a prone position, but I stalled a bit, and I opened up my laptop, and I opened up my email, and of course, that's the last thing you want to do when you want to take a nap, right? But anyway, I'm so glad that I did. For there was the announcement that two of our newer members, Lizzie and Steve, had indeed had their baby, Quentin, and they included a picture of their newly expanded family. I had to forward the news to our pastoral care team immediately, and to Marilyn, since she and I had just talked that morning about had the baby come yet. Our team, our pastoral care team, has been caring for a lot of different situations in our congregation lately. And I thought that I should share the joy of this good news. And I delayed my nap just a little longer as I immediately ordered a book to share with the family, the book by Deborah Fraser, On the Day That You Were Born. How many of you know that book? Yeah. It includes these words: on the day you were born, the earth turned, the moon pulled, the sun flared, and then with a push, you slipped out of the dark quiet where suddenly you could hear a circle of people singing with voices familiar and clear. Welcome to the spinning world, the people sang, as they washed your new tiny hands. Welcome to the green earth, the people sang, as they wrapped your wet, slippery body. And as they held you close, they whispered into your open, curving ear, we are so glad you've come. Let's say that sentence out loud and direct it to Quentin. We're so glad you came. Now, I did get my minister's nap that afternoon, eventually. And it should be no surprise to many of you that among my first impulses at the news of Quentin's birth was to buy a book, right? What else do you do? So as I was anticipating standing in front of you this morning, anticipating welcoming our new members, imagining this quilt with the names of members current, those who've moved away, and those who've transitioned from this life, I imagined each of you, each of us, as a story, an embodied story, and together a collection of stories. Stories that have been told, stories that have not yet been told, and stories from long ago, stories from right now, or anticipated stories. And I get this sense that trajectory in my own life as a child who loved to listen to the stories of older adults, as a child who loved to read books, particularly biographies as a child, that's a sense of a trajectory between then and now is so present in all the roles that I've had in life as a counselor, as a teacher, and as a minister. I come most alive when I hear your stories, when we have conversations that include your stories. Imagine for a moment that each of the stories of our lives is contained in a book. Take a moment to imagine what that book would look like. How might you describe that book? For some of us, in the book that is our lives, we are perhaps in the first few chapters of that book. For others of us, we are perhaps right in the middle of the book. And for some of us, we are in the culminating chapters of that book that is our lives. We never really know, actually, if we're in the beginning or the middle or the end, since I believe that we could have in any one of our lives multiple beginnings, middles, and endings. And I don't know if it's just me, but I often feel like I'm in the middle of something. Is that just me? If we flip through the pages of the book that is our lives, we might notice that some of the pages are well worn, as if we may have relentlessly gone over that page again and again. Or we might discover that some pages are dog-eared, so that we can go back to those events only when we choose to do so. Some of the books that are our lives may seem like real page turners, or we may struggle to keep up with all the unfolding events that comprise who we are. And others may seem to be slow going. Or maybe the book that is our lives may be some combination of slow going, that's slow going, and page turners. Would you describe the book that is your life as a mystery novel? A romantic novel? I was going to ask for a show of hands at this point, but I won't. I'm resisting. Or is the story that is your life, does it read more like an investigative report or a travel guide? In the binding of the book that is your life, is that binding sewn in real tight? Or are there some sections of the book that are coming loose from the binding? Maybe you've tried to or have wished to tear a chapter or two out of that book. And maybe the book of your life is a work in progress. Maybe it's a classic story. This I do know. There are chapters in our lives just as there are chapters in a book. Candace Carpenter, in her book Chapters, offers this metaphor of chapters in reflecting on our lives, where we've been, where we're heading, and where we are now. And she writes, each chapter of a book introduces different elements of the plot while still keeping to a central storyline, so that each chapter of our lives can be devoted to a different aspect of who we are, what we aspire to, and how we want to live while keeping to that central narrative of our own life. If that is so, then this perspective begs the question, what is that central storyline of your life? What is that central narrative of who it is that you are, that you seem to be unfolding in your life through the various chapters of the life that is yours? The depth psychologist Ira Progoff encourages us not to just log the events of our lives, but to also enter into our lives in a way where we can have an inner sense of this trajectory, this storyline, this narrative line within and across the events of our life. Progoff writes, we are dancers, joining the dance of our life as it is going on and continuing it toward its fulfillment. Now, one of the methods that Progoff uses is included in his intensive journal method. Simply spoken, it's taking a time to list the stepping stones of your own life. Stepping stones might be another way of thinking about what are the chapters that comprise the story of your life. Now, we can't take time to do that, but I do want to say that oftentimes in his method he says, limit it to 7. Come up with 7. What would those 7 stepping stone periods of your life be? And you know what I've discovered is whatever list you make today might be different than one that you made 3 years ago or one you'll make 3 months from now. So we don't have time to think about 7 chapters, 7 defining periods of your life. But maybe we have time to just think about 3 for a moment. Perhaps there are 3 stepping stone periods in your life, defining moments in your life. If we go to the place of imagination, we might discover that those 3 stepping stones might find us rather than us finding them. Or you might think of it as 3 canvases. One canvas, I'm looking at you, Nancy, one canvas here, another canvas here, and another canvas here. What would be The title, the defining title of those stepping stones, of those canvases, you might say, well, there is this time. And think about what the first one could be. And then there is this time. What would that second chapter or stepping stone be if you were to take a moment to divide your life? And then there is this time or this chapter. We might come to realize that there are certain moments that were crossroads or decision moments in our lives where we may have had to choose between one or two paths ahead of us. Oh, they're always that simple. At least two. What have been those crossroad moments for you? Being able to take this kind of pause now and then and look at our lives both from the outside, how far we've traveled, what we've accomplished, what we've brought about in the world, but also from the inside. What is unfolding in my life? What is that trajectory, that narrative trajectory, that through line? What is wanting to unfold in my life? When asked to do this, one person came up with the following stark but expressive list of stepping stones. She had time to do more than 3. She wrote, I was born. That's a good place to start. Okay. I loved. I danced. I wept. I posed. I suffered. I was entranced. I was humiliated. I got lost. I'm trying to find my way. Do you see some of the trajectory of that life that was hers, that is hers? When you have a chance to do this list of stepping stones, always conclude with the open-ended statement of, now is the time for. So you'll remember it. I want you to say that after me. Now is the time for. Mark Nepo calls the lessons that have unfolded from our life and are still unfolding our inner curriculum. What is our inner curriculum? We are tempted to often put our reliance on external things, our property, our finances, our approval from others, how many likes we might have, how many followers, whether we are an influencer or not. And while these can be encouraging and rewarding, if we only focus on the external, then we might become entrapped into thinking only from the inside of our lives, from the outside of our lives, from the surface of our lives. Our religious ancestor, Ralph Waldo Emerson, encouraged us to also look where our center of balance is between the external events and accomplishments and the inner events, our inner curriculum. Emerson urges us to do much, but also to be much. He encourages us to draw upon and cultivate our inner strengths as well. These strengths could include integrity, courage, compassion, reverence, and gratitude. So if we looked at our lives as a teacher for us, there is a way, I think, that we could ask specific questions of our lives out of 3 categories. The first category is knowing ourselves. If we focus on that first category, we ask ourselves, what am I discovering about who I am? About what my values are, about what I care about what I want to give to this world. If we look at ourselves from the mastering ourselves, from that phase, we might want to ask ourselves, what is it that I definitely want to and intentionally bring forth? And what do I want to leave behind that impedes my capacity to align myself with where I feel called and directed in my life? That requires some mastery. And then the third phase is transforming ourselves. What does it mean to become that which I aspire to? What shape and new form might I need to take both within myself as well as my action in the world? So those three phases, knowing ourselves, mastering ourselves, transforming ourselves, are a way to begin to draw some of the lessons from our own life. And it's the same for congregations as well. If we were to look at the history and the story of this congregation, we are at a juncture, at a point where it's important to ask questions of ourselves. The first question could be in that category of knowing. What have we discovered about ourselves since COVID? What have we discovered about who we are, what we value, what we really care about? Second category, mastering ourselves. What are those things that we want to make as priorities because they are aligned with who it is that we are and the impact that we want to make? And what are those things that impede our capacity to do that we might want to lay aside? And then finally, what are those things that call us towards a transformation that might require risks? It might require letting go of the tight bud of what we already know and allowing what wants to unfold. That's the kind of conversation that this congregation needs right now, alongside of our own individual conversations as well. Who do we want to become? What do we want to master? And what transformation is beckoning us?